Welcome to the Lowdown Music Podcast, featuring intimate conversations with emerging and established musicians, recorded at the Gaslight Studios in St. Louis. And now your host, Aaron Perlin. Welcome back to the Lowdown Music Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Perlin. We are presented by Wellbeing Brewing and Shinesty. Today, we have the honor of being joined by the Grammy-winning Jon Foreman, frontman and founder of Switchfoot. Jon, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a real honor to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me in.
So, Jon, I know Switchfoot is a pretty well-known band. You guys have had a string of hits starting in the mid and late 90s. But I'd love to hear more about you and your history. And I know growing up that you moved around a bit with your father, who was a pastor. You spent time, you were born in California, moved to Massachusetts, my home state of Virginia, and eventually back to kind of the San Diego area where you ultimately founded the band with your brother. But I'd like to hear more about your musical journey and what really kind of launched you to what you've become and where you are today.
Yeah. So for me, music has been this constant companion that has kind of been a river that I've swum in from a very young age. My parents are both musicians. There were always guitars, and there's a piano that we'd be banging around on. And so writing songs and being around songs was not something that I've ever known otherwise. And I think I first began to take advantage of music as a means to get somewhere else, almost as a vehicle, emotional vehicle, was in junior high. Actually, maybe like junior high, right into high school. I moved my freshman year of high school to a new high school. I moved from Virginia, where, East Coast to the West Coast, and
which is a terrible time.
Didn't have any friends.
Terrible time to move.
Yeah, you're this post-pubescent kid who's just kind of like unsure of everything already, and it was really difficult. I thought I would make a lot of friends and fit in, and I didn't. I was the weird kid that didn't have any friends. I remember walking around at lunch because when you don't have anyone to sit with and talk with, you'd finish lunch in like 3 minutes, and then the rest of the time you're like, oh crap, I got to eat slower, Yeah. So music became this. I began to have a stuttering problem and trying to figure out how to communicate, where music was this portal of communication where I was able to express myself. And I realized I could talk about anything. I could talk about, politics, sex, God, disbelief, doubt, whatever it is. And I could be completely succinct and clear about all these really awkward subjects. And I could do it in front of perfect strangers. And so that's kind of where I first started realizing that power of music. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah, it sounds to me very similar to how I used alcohol, quite frankly. And we're actually presented by a non-alcoholic beer, Wellbeing Brewing, but I used it as a means to kind of socially adapt when I was in high school, because I thought it would get me a certain somewhere, because I had this social anxiety that I didn't realize I had, but I was trying to use it as a vehicle to meet people, to engage, to be cool. And of course, it had the exact opposite effect. People just thought I was an asshole, but that's interesting. So did you find yourself, and I imagine you were doing this with your brother, because you guys have always played music together, I'm sure, growing up in the house and at church and ultimately in Switchfoot. But at what point do you put together your first band?
Yeah, so I was in my first band in junior high. We were a Zeppelin cover band. that was awful. And yeah, we were horrible. But we loved it. At that age, you really have no reason to think that it's a bad idea, and then I always joke that once you hit puberty, then you have to write your own songs because you can't hit those notes anymore.
I always wonder if that's why.
Yeah, Zeppelin was great.
I always wonder if that's why Plant refuses to get Zeppelin back together, because he just can't hit those notes anymore. Because I don't,
Right? Yeah. I mean, they are high. They're up there. So here's a full circle story. So, guy that I was in a band with in junior high, it's one of my best friends. His name's Todd. I introduced him to my bandmate's sister. I'm in a band with Sean Watkins from Nickel Creek, and his sister is Sarah Watkins, also of Nickel Creek. And so we introduced these two amazing people at a New Year's Eve party that we threw. And fast forward, Sean and Sarah become really good friends with John Paul Jones. And when Zeppelin had their reunion concert, they left a few tickets for Sean and Sarah, and Sean brought me and Sarah, her husband, Todd. And so I ended up going to see the one and only Zeppelin show during my lifetime with the junior high Zeppelin band member that I was in, the cover band. So I will never forget that moment. I mean, it felt full circle, right? Like junior high all the way to actually watching Plant attempt to hit those high notes live. It was a beautiful moment.
So if there's any true value that you got out of Fiction Family, your other band, it's that you got to go see Led Zeppelin.
Other than some of my best friends on the planet and some great tunes, that moment was absolutely unforgettable.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to Switchfoot, and you guys have had a really interesting evolution. Like a lot of musicians and bands, you kind of struck gold when your music got included into the film A Walk to Remember, and that seemed to be kind of the tipping point for you when you guys went from here to something that it gave you access and opportunity to really grow. But you had kind of been growing up until that point, but then it's kind of like John Mellencamp talks about people rediscovering himself when one of his songs got put into a Chevy commercial. All of a sudden, Bob Seger got rediscovered when he was in a Chevy commercial and he's singing Like the Rock again.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like that was a big moment for you guys. And as beautiful and wonderful as Mandy Moore might be, I mean, having your music then heard through that film and really seemed to be a great moment for you.
Yeah, that was it was surreal, because I think San Diego's fairly close to Hollywood and Los Angeles physically, and yet we are worlds away in our musical scene. I think San Diego is much more. It's a small, especially when we were growing up, small town. Everyone's pretty supportive of each other. You're rooting for your home team, and in LA, it's very cutthroat and a lot of bigger names. And so I remember very distinctly going up to walk the red carpet for the film and feeling completely out of place, having photographers like after taking our picture going, "Who are you? Why did I take this picture?" And yeah, it was really funny because we basically we did the red carpet thing, and then we went back to touring in a minivan. That was the the thing. We were touring around the country in a minivan. We go walk the red carpet, see the film, and then go back to work. Yeah, but it was a beautiful thing, and I do think it helped. You're always looking for a way to kind of get your music out to more people than than the 15 people that show up in the club, you know. I was really honored that Mandy sang one of our songs in the film too. That was really cool. I've never really thought of myself as a singer, and so I'm always trying to get other people to sing our songs. And that was like this moment where I thought, oh wow, that's what the song's supposed to sound like, you know.
but that led you to your major label debut, The Beautiful Letdown, which, you know, arguably your two biggest hits came off that record, and you sold nearly 3 million copies of that album. But Meant to Live and Dare to Move, and if you play those songs for almost anyone, they recognize those songs, which is kind of a big deal. You know, when you can play or show a piece of art or have a piece of art from an audio standpoint and they know it immediately, I mean, that's kind of a cool thing. I mean, you must have reached a point there where you're like, holy shit, this is pretty cool. You know?
Yeah. It definitely brought us, we that was a record that brought us out of touring in a minivan.
Yeah.
So that was and it's surreal, you know. I remember on that album particularly, it feels like you're introduced to a different circus. You think of Madison Square Garden and the big radio stations, record companies, all those things. I think you think of them as being somehow above and transcending the minivan tour somehow, you know, better than, I think, qualitative terms of measuring success, that these are the things you think of. But I think for us, it was this realization that it is neither better than nor worse than. It is different, and there's a lot more people, but I don't know that better. I remember we were at this, I think it was like a huge pop radio station in Madison Square Garden, that they have this event, the Jingle Ball or something, and there's Destiny's Child, and there's all these different bands are there, and I mean, we're the only band that's playing guitars at this point, and Donald Trump is there, and this is, you know, in 2003. There's that guy, I think his name was William Hung, who had a big hit for his.
Yeah. William Hung.
Yeah, and
he was on so American Idol or something like that, or one of those.
Yeah, yeah. So I think Donald Trump introduced William Hung, and then we went on after that and played a song acoustic, and it's just one of these things where these are things that feel like strange dreams in my head, where I have to ask them, so like, did that happen? Was that real life? And Destiny's Child was there, and wait a second. So, but apparently those are the things that particular album opened up for us. And then it became this matter of saying, okay, well, who are we and what do we actually want to do? Is that where we want to live? And where does our music belong?
And what's the answer to that question when you think about it deep down in your soul?
So I think it's ever evolving. You know, I think that answer should change over the years. And I think that music has so many different uses and purposes other than its obvious beauty and intangible reason for existing in and of itself. I think our response to that was kind of to write records and songs that felt like they fit in a smaller venue. And I feel like rock and roll for us meant a personal connection with people that is often unavailable in that space of kind of disposable pop. And I have nothing against pop songs. I love pop music, but I felt like we wanted to write about meaning and purpose, and we kind of, the next record we made was kind of questioning the American dream. And I don't know that has too much place on American Airways. I don't think that's something that a consumer says, no, I want to hear more about that.
Yeah.
So that was our response and to that was Nothing Is Sound.
Well,
and that kind of directly responded to that situation.
It's interesting you bring that up, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about was kind of the fickle nature of the American listening public. Like, you take a band like, let's take the Counting Crows. Counting Crows put out their first album in, I want to say like 94, maybe 95. And it's huge. It blows up. And they've put out a bunch of records since then, and they've been really good records. But they none of them have been to the level of the attention of that first one, even though they put out quality music. That must, as an artist, frustrate the living shit out of you. And I don't think that's immune to any artist. I've found that the American listening public seems to be like, okay, we heard a lot of this record, now we're going to move on to, whatever's in front of me next time. Or are you just kind of like, screw it, we're going to keep making art. We've got our core fans. They come out to see us and we tour. Like, but do you notice that? Do you know what I'm kind of getting at here?
Yeah. I think my twofold response to that is, I think, on the one hand, you want every album to be heard for what it is. I want that for every band, every single person. But I'm surrounded by incredibly talented people that I look at and I go, how come I get to play for thousands of people and they play in their bedroom? I genuinely, when people ask, how do you make a living with music? I'm just like, I have no idea. I don't know how it happens. My heroes when I was a kid, I grew up going to backyard parties and helping people load in at the Casbah or wherever I could kind of sneak in. And those were my heroes. Like, the heroes were the people that they toured California. Where you're like, dude, that guy's in a real band. They made CDs.
They played at
That's so legit.
They played at Applebee's and handed me some CDs.
Right? Yeah. My first album that I made with my brother when we were in high school, we mathed and sell, I think it was 300 copies to break even. And that was success. And I guess what I'm getting at is the metric of our success, if it's dependent on numbers and external factors, is always going to disappoint us. And if the metric of success is built on something a little bit more transcendent, the beauty of your art per se, or the how well and succinctly you communicated this idea to your listener, I feel like that's something that you can achieve that has nothing to do with a number. Because we all know numbers mean nothing. Our favorite band will never be played as much as some trance DJ on Spotify or whatever it is, that you can say, he took 5 minutes to make that thing. How come it's so huge? Without getting into what is the worth of art. I think for me, trying to remind myself that there's a different purpose other than the numbers is always helpful.
We are talking to the great Jon Foreman of Switchfoot, and we will be right back after this message. Hey, this is Aaron Perlett, and for those who have been listening, know that Wellbeing Brewing is pretty much my favorite drink in the world, because I quit drinking alcohol a couple of years ago and discovered Wellbeing, and it really has been my salvation. I am fortunate to be joined by Jeff Stevens, who is the founder and CEO of Wellbeing. Jeff, first of all, thank you so much for being a partner with The Loadout, and tell us about, this is such a unique non-alcoholic beer because it actually tastes like great beer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, because that's the most important thing for us. We invested a lot of money into figuring out how to make great non-alcoholic craft beer. And that was something that I was really interested in. And to have someone like you say, you know what, I can drink this beer and do all the things that I would normally do and don't miss a thing. That makes it all, so great for us.
And it is a craft beer. I mean, I was from the time I was probably 14 or 15, I was a drinker until I was the time I was about 47.
Yeah.
And I have always been a beer guy, beer and bourbon. And I especially got into more flavorful beers over the past 10 years. But Wellbeing, whether it's the Hellraiser Amber or the Wellbeing, and you've actually got, or the IPA rather, and you've got a pretty nice group of growing products.
Yeah.
That are pretty impressive. But what's the secret to? I mean, when you compare it to some of the other more watered down imitators, what's the secret to making it so good?
Yeah, there's several ways you can make non-alcoholic beer, and we chose this way called vacuum distillation. So what it allows us to do, and this is the thing that comes through, is we fully ferment the beer. We make it just like you'd normally make alcohol beer. So it's ready to be alcohol beer, and then we take it, put it in a vacuum, lower the boiling point of the beer, and gently remove the alcohol. So what you're left with is all the mouthfeel and the flavor of beer without the alcohol. And I think that's where our products are distinct, is that mouthfeel, that aroma, that flavor that really comes through, versus you can stop the fermentation. That's another method. And those are a little more watery, I think, or just don't quite hold up as well, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being a partner. If you want to sample Wellbeing, you can go to wellbeingbrewing.com and use the code LOADOUT10 at checkout, and you will get a discount on Wellbeing from being a Loadout listener. Jeff, thank you so much for being a partner, and thank you so much for making this amazing product.
Aaron, my pleasure. Thank you for drinking it.
Hey, and we're back with Jon Foreman of Switchfoot. Jon, right before the break, we were talking a little bit about kind of the fickle nature of the American listening public, and you kind of delved into something that I find interesting, and that is kind of where the audience is today and finding the audience. And it is fascinating. I mean, the record industry in and of itself has become kind of a shit show. You see this a lot in the alt country space because there's really nowhere on radio outside of outlaw country radio on Sirius XM that has a place for a ton of amazingly talented acts these days that are in that alt country genre. And even a band like yours today. I mean, there's on traditional radio, there's classic rock, there's new rock, and it's like, where do we all fit in today? It's I imagine you must have these conversations with your band. You must have these conversations with people from labels. Like, where do we fit in today? Especially outside of we fit in a 5,000 seat auditorium. That's where I fit in today. But beyond that, is that a struggle for you?
Yeah, I mean, it is an ever-changing conundrum. I'm reminded that when I say the word music, people think of this readily repeatable medium that you press play, and that has only existed for less than 100 years in a widely available form. So when you said, hey, have you bought this song 100 years ago? It would be, you'd buy the sheet music.
Yeah.
So the commerce of music is at least as it applies to the recorded form of music, will always intrinsically be attached to technology, because that's the only way we can press play. And as technology changes, I think, everything's going to be rising and falling on that tide. But I'm reminded of the fact that, I pick up this guitar here, and that is a musical form that goes back, maybe to the dawn of time, maybe to what it means to be human. And so if we distinguish that as live music and remind ourselves that that's actually what ties us to the rest of human history, I think for me that is a bit more of an easier place to take a breath and remember a foundation that exists. Because I do think it is a strange thing, because you're trying to find a home for a song, you're looking for a box.
Yeah.
And a lot of times music hopefully is clawing to get out of the box, and so if it doesn't fit in the box, I have to remind myself that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't do well for paying on car loans or whatever, but it's a beautiful thing not fit in the box.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of not fitting in a box, I know this has been a point of frustration for you, and I've seen the band from a business perspective wrestle with this over the years, kind of going back and forth between the moniker of being a Christian rock band. Your father's a pastor. You and your brother were raised in kind of a faith-based environment. You guys have been at times called a Christian rock band. At times you've been called a rock band. There's been times where you have done interviews with Christian media and have not, trying to get away from that stigma because you just didn't want to have any stigma that was attached to you. You guys just want to play music. Talk a little bit about the frustration of that, because I think unless someone wants to read way, way, way into your lyrics, they're probably not going to find a whole lot. And then you get this label slapped on you that's, I would imagine, kind of annoying at times, because you just want to be you and do your thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you're talking about a genre, a box, and for me, my faith is anything but box. I think it's for me, Christianity is this faith, not a genre. It reflects on the way I treat people and the way I live my life. And certainly it's going to be found in my lyrics, much like anyone's ideology is going to be found in their lyrics. But I think the thing that, for me, I grew up, my dad taught me Stairway to Heaven, and I didn't really see that being a problem. I show up at youth group and I play Stairway to Heaven, and people are like, whoa, you can't play that here. That's you're playing the other team or something. And I don't really see it that way. I see all music as being worthwhile expressions of whatever it is within that individual that they're attempting to communicate. And I think, I guess for me, growing up in that background, I was just really surprised by the closed-minded insistence of people on both sides that, no, you have to be in a box. You have to either be this or that, because I mean, it becomes this thing where it's just this didactic, closed-minded, fundamentalist mentality that feels a contra to everything that I love of music. Music is this place where I want to hear anything. If you're telling the truth about your story, I'm ready for it. Hip hop, opera, alt country, whatever it is. If you got a good story there, I can feel that. And so that's kind of the world we attempt to live in, with people that are open-minded enough to go there with us.
Yeah. I imagine 2011, Switchfoot wins a Grammy for Best Rock or Gospel Album. That must have been, we talked about having your music and Walk to Remember being one of those tipping points. Winning that Grammy in 2011 must have been one of those points where you're like, damn, this does not suck in any way.
Yeah. I mean, so we were in the middle of recording a record, and it was very much, so when we signed with Columbia, it was this thing where you're like, oh my gosh, this is the same logo that's on the back of Kind of Blue. This is the same logo that's on the back of the Dylan albums. We have made it. We're officially a band, right? Like, and then immediately afterwards, we were relegated, dropped to a subsidiary company, this company called RED, because we played a show in New York, and the head of the label said, why do you keep signing this crap? And then 2 million records later, he changed his mind and said, no, this is our band. This is the success story. So I feel the same thing about all of these external forms of these metrics that you can hold on to. Because again, that I don't feel like that album is better or worse than other albums. I think it's got some really good things, but I guess I'm hesitant to let those winds drive the ship. I want to be blown by a wind that's moving. I think on a deeper level. I feel like those kind of things can, because that's only going to happen once or twice, and if that's the only thing that matters to you, then you're going to be depressed for the other, 11 records that you make.
Yeah, one of these. Well, we can only go down, so let's.
Yeah,
let's not think
here we
about
go.
this
We're at
anymore.
the top.
Yeah. We are talking to Jon Foreman of Switchfoot. We'll be right back after this message. And now a quick word from one of our sponsors. Have you ever wanted a tightly wrapped American flag around your waist with a giant bald eagle face placed squarely on your junk? Or how about a Steve Harvey coronavirus mask? Or maybe the next evolution of jorts in the form of a hot and sexy denim Speedo. But maybe, just maybe, you're dying for a pair of Kansas City Chiefs overalls or even leopard pants. Yes, 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 and most definitely yes. And it's all pretty easily found at Shinesty, the perfectly weird party gear website that I find myself escaping to every time I need a mental break from the miserable 2020 we've been having. So check out our new sponsor at shinesty.com. That's the word shine, STY.com, and use the code LOADOUT15, that's LOADOUT15 at checkout. Now back to this less than spectacular show. And we're back on the Loadout Music Podcast. Today we're joined by Jon Foreman of Switchfoot. Jon, I want to jump back to something you and I were talking about before, and that is, we talked very briefly about Fiction Family, but that was in the vein of the free hookup to go see Led Zeppelin, which is awesome. But
it doesn't win you many friends.
No,
saying that you saw Led Zeppelin. All my bandmates hated me.
But here's the thing. In the real world, if I work at Company A and say, hey, I'm also going to work at Company B, they say, well, you know what? You can leave Company A and you can go work for Company B because we don't want anything to do with you. In your case, though, you've got this brotherhood in Switchfoot that understood your deal with Fiction Family is a separate thing, but a parallel thing. And that's got to take a special kind of relationship, though, when you're able to do that.
Yeah, obviously my brother, my literal brother, but, Chad and Drew and Jerome, we have this friendship that is really unusual. We actually like each other, 12 records in, we still really care about each other and have a friendship. And I think that is specifically the reason where, they've allowed me, and not only allowed, but really encouraged and supported, what is this, 8 solo EPs and a full length, and then 2 Fiction Family full lengths. That's a lot of music to say, no, go out and do your own thing. So I just feel really fortunate to be in a band that is supportive of these side projects of mine.
How do you differentiate musically between how you write for Switchfoot and how you write for Fiction Family, not only lyrically but also from a composition standpoint? In your mind, are they very different kinds of compositions?
Great question. I think sometimes the composition can determine it. Sometimes the subject material can determine it, and sometimes the production can feel like that's the determining factor. I think it's pretentious to say that there's no way that this song could exist over here. It's more of a feeling, I guess. That the solo songs feel more like a whisper, kind of a confessional thing late at night, very intimate, and then Switchfoot feels a little bit more like a megaphone, where it's hard to be confessional and broken when you have half stacks of guitars and drums and strobe lights and a disco ball. It really feels like, are you confessing or are we partying? What's happening here?
But is it, I mean, is it, do you ever find it's a struggle for you? You write a piece and you're like, I could use this here. I could use this here. Well, you know what? If we add another lead to this melody, then okay, then this could fit in Switchfoot. I mean, do you go through that process, or is it just a very organic thing?
It's pretty organic. I just play it for my brother, and if he likes it, it's a Switchfoot song.
so it's your brother makes the choice, huh?
Yeah, and I mean the funny thing is we have just hundreds of songs that no one's ever heard, and so there's never. I think that's the other thing with this is that it's not a matter of saying, well, you've only written 2 songs this year. You can't give both of them to this other project. It's like, no, we got plenty of songs. If you don't like it, I'll write another 10 and we'll figure it out, you know?
Yeah, let me go see what I've got on the laptop. I've got 1,900 sets of lyrics here. And so
I do think, like, to any songwriter out there, I think there is something to be said about being organized. And that's something that it's not my strong suit. There's a friend of mine, Jack Tempchin. He wrote Peaceful, Easy Feeling and a bunch of songs, huge Eagles songs and other stuff. And he will keep all of his songs organized by day, by lyric, song. Everything is very clear cut and well defined. And I'm very inspired by that. I haven't gone that route yet, but someday that's what I want to do. And if I were talking to a younger songwriter, I would say, if you start that now, that's the way to do it. Because then every song you write is organized in a few seconds rather than trying to retroactively figure out which hard drive everything's on.
And then Jack stores it on both microfilm and microfiche, both of them.
Yes, exactly.
For those old enough to understand what that is. Okay, we got to talk about August 20th. You have a new record coming out from Switchfoot. From what I gather, this is a more edgy Switchfoot than has been the past. At least that's how it's been described to me. What differentiates, and maybe that's just, you know, your publicist blowing smoke up my ass. Tell me, in your mind, you wrote these songs. Tell us about this new record, what differentiates it, what makes it unique, and what you expect from it.
Yeah, so I do think it is a marked departure from Native Tongue, which was our last album. And I feel like it's by and large because the world is a different place than it was in 2019. And I think that the reason why bands change, the reason why, songwriting style changes, for me, if you're writing from the same place, it means that your place has changed, you know? And I feel like that's true for all of us, for every songwriter to think that you went through 2020 and you remained unchanged. I'd love to hear your story, but I don't believe it straight off, you know?
Yeah. You're full of shit. You're full of shit.
Yeah.
Shit.
So, this record feels like a response to a really dark, strange, questioning year where I've never had anxiety attacks. I've never, there's so many things that I experienced this year, and I'm not alone. I'm not saying I'd probably every one of my friends that we experienced it in different ways, but that's what this record is responding to. And so I think this has much more layers than the last album. And specifically working with Tony Berg, I think that was a conscious decision to try and unpack places that we wouldn't have gotten to ourselves.
And for people who don't know Tony's track record, he's kind of produced huge names. So working with him, I'm sure, must have been a real honor, but also a really great experience for you.
Yeah. So Tony, I'm so honored to call him a friend. He is one of the most, in his own words, demonstrative, aggressively atheist Argumentative. He loves that tension.
Yeah.
And I'm the type of person who usually does not like tension in my life. I feel like, especially in 2020, I didn't need any more tension. And yet that he kind of thrives on it, And so I think that this whole album was kind of almost, if you're going to use the pearl and the oyster kind of analogy, this was attempting to bring beauty out of friction, not only with the year we had, but with tension in the studio. And I'm so proud of this record because I think it was almost like an experiment. Can people who fundamentally disagree with each other on so many things create something beautiful together? And I feel like that you could call that experiment America. You call that experiment a marriage, a friendship, a record, whatever you want to call it. But for us, it had a happy ending.
Very cool. So lyrically, kind of looking at the last year or two, musically, is it going to satisfy? I mean, Switchfoot fans are. I remember I asked somebody, how would you describe, when I was doing some research for this, how would you describe Switchfoot fans? And they said they're dedicated to this band. Are Switchfoot fans going to feel like, from a composition standpoint, musically, set the lyrics aside, is it going to, make them happy? Is it going to, serve up that appetite and help them feel filled?
I have no idea. I will say, I think that there's, much like anyone, there's different sides to you that, your one friend will see one side, one friend will see a different side. I think for people who've been with us for a while, this would be these kind of obtuse chord progressions and quirky leading lines and things. I think these are the things we were doing very early on, unknowingly thinking that this is what music was. And then, as you develop in your craft, you think, oh, I'm the only one doing these weird things. I'm gonna figure out a way to say something more succinctly. I think this album throws all of that away, and it really disregards any form of what Spotify or iTunes or any of that is doing. And it just says, hey, this is who we are, and this is the album that we alone can make. No one else can make this one. And so I do hope that people love it. I know people will feel it's definitely it's a record that I hope that people listen to several times to fully understand.
You're going to destroy the algorithms, Jon. You're destroying them.
Or be destroyed by them. One or the other.
All right. So you are hitting the road to the new album comes out here the end of August. You're hitting the road September 17th. 38 dates. You're playing with Need to Breathe, which if you've never seen Need to Breathe, I've seen them several times. Interesting choice to tour with you guys. They, they've got, them having kind of background in Southern rock, bluegrass, and then you guys being just, a pure rock and roll band. Should be a really interesting show. Should be a fun show to see. 38 dates around the U.S. Jon Foreman, thank you so much for joining us on the Loadout podcast. It has been a real joy, real privilege to have you on, and we hope that the album just destroys the algorithm. And,
Thank you for having me on, and thanks for the great questions.
Hey folks, if you made it this far, and judging by our numbers you haven't, thanks for listening to the Loadout Music Podcast. You can always find us at loadoutmusic.com and wherever you like to get your podcasts, like iTunes or SoundCloud. And of course, as always, thanks to Gaslight Studios for hosting us. Have a good one.